think what's interesting for me about horror is that there's lots of different people who love it. And it's one of those things that I think from the outside is quite easily misinterpreted as being like, and actually, you know, Blood on Her Tongue is a good example of this in terms of the character. Whereas this idea with the fascination with morbidity is, you know, we think of there'll be a lot of people who think, well, why do you like it? And it's, you know, why do you like horrible stuff? And I think it's really helpful as a way of just like dispelling it, even amongst our own community who understand this, but just to talk about where you come from and your journey to finding that and your fascination for it. So tell me about when you were younger, and also I read in the was the dedication that have you got sisters? Have you
Yeah,
got
two sisters, like we're triplets. Yeah.
triplets? So three of you, are you the eldest, middlest, youngest?
I'm the oldest, and then my
Ah.
sisters are, but they are identical, and I'm not. So that's
Oh,
interesting. Yeah, because I'm on this, like on the one hand, I am inside of a multiple relationship, sort of to speak, and on the other hand, I'm on the outside looking in because they're identical to each other, but not to me. So I think that's an interesting perspective to have.
when did you kind of like have an awareness of your tripletiness? Was it like, did you get to a certain age where you were like, or even, oh, they're identical and I'm not, but
So
we're all.
I don't remember this, but my parents remember this because they thought it was very interesting. But I think around 4 years of age, that's when you start to become self-aware and you start
Yeah.
to realize that you look at like a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. So I was at that, like, and I don't think it was a instantaneous thing, it was a gradual thing because I did tell my parents, like, oh, like people always confuse my sisters, but they never do that for me. And I didn't understand why that was. And then at one point, I looked into a mirror and I like sprinted to my parents and I was like, I look different. And I like it was a whole revelation for me that I didn't look the same.
Were you disappointed or were you quite happy in a way?
I don't
No,
remember,
of
but I
course not.
think I think it was a bit of a disappointment because or at least it was kind of I guess it must have been a very formative moment, even though I don't remember it, just because it was newsworthy to me that I didn't look like my sisters did. Because I thought because we've always been together, so I probably just assumed I
Yeah.
looked the same. And then people didn't treat us the same, and that was already weird to me.
Can I ask a very ignorant question about being a twin or actually a triplet, a part of a triplet? Is obviously there's this, and actually, I think even in the dedication mentioned this as well. Like, there's obviously a perception of like almost this kind of telekinetic kind of relationship or a bond that you have with triplets or twins that is stronger than just a normal kind of brotherly, sisterly, whatever relationship. And I know again, it's quite hard for you to objectively, you know, answer this maybe, but like, do you have like do you feel like you have a really close bond with your sisters that
No, I definitely
uh,
do. And I did ask them, like, is it different for them? Because they have one identical twin and then me, who's different. And they said it doesn't matter. The only thing they did mention is like, oh, it's just a little more intuitive with the other sister, just to understand like where she's coming from, her thought process. But they love me the same. And I mean, I obviously love them a lot. And I don't know if that's partially because on the one hand, I want to say it's partially because I just grew up with them, so we were always together. And then obviously you bond with the people you spend a lot of time with. And I know other people who also have really good relationships with their siblings. But at the same time, I do think there is something interesting about it because you do read these stories of twins who were separated at birth and then they always
oh,
feel like they were missing something and then they finally discover they have an identical twin and everything is right in the world again. So yeah, I do think there is something special about this bond. But
yeah.
yeah, it's hard to describe because I'm on the inside of it, so it's hard to I don't know what it's like not to be.
Yeah, well, I guess it's quite interesting because in with siblings who are slightly different ages, like I'm the eldest, so I went through everything first for my parents, and I've got two younger brothers. And so there's a kind of sense of like you kind of go through life and you experience life at different stages, and how I go through my life kind of knocks on to my sibling and then to him. And usually it's like the youngest child just gets fucking really easy time out of it. And the eldest is like the one. But for you guys, you kind of all got to experience everything at the same time, which must have been really nice in a lot of ways. Just to kind of to feel like you're in it together.
Yeah, you're never alone. So that's a really good feeling. That's true. So I sometimes do wonder if I'm gonna have kids of my own. I almost feel sorry for them if they're not a twin because they don't get to experience that.
Well, I mean, and no hate to only children, but I feel firstly it's lonely just in and of itself, but also there's a thing of like growing older, and if you have aging parents as well, the responsibility of one person looking after your whole family is a lot. But obviously, like you guys, you'll be. It sounds like you've got a good, strong family unit, and that's not that. If stress happens in your family, you've got at least the three of you to kind of to work it out, which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I want to ask about where you did you grow up in a you say you live now in like this town. Did you grow up in a fairly kind of rural environment? Is it a city environment?
So in the Netherlands, basically the whole West Coast is city. It's just like
Yeah,
one
of
city
course, yeah.
after another, touching on each other. So I grew up in like a small town, but it's not rural by any means. Yeah, I wouldn't say like it's not like Amsterdam, it's not that busy. But yeah, I lived around The Hague and in The Hague, growing up. Yeah.
Were you bored as a child, or did you find it easy to kind of like, you know, find things that interested you?
I have to say, like, I was really bored often as a
Yeah.
child. Like, I found classes really
Yeah.
easy. I found them quite boring. So I definitely had certain interests that would really captivate me. But yeah, I definitely had a lot of times where I was just really, really bored.
And what would you do when you were bored?
Probably like I played a lot with my sisters. I would read. Um, yeah, mainly I like to read. I like to fantasize. I mean, I guess that's why I'm a writer now.
Done. It worked
But
out.
no, I do because I always had my sisters to play with. So in that sense, like I was mainly bored in school, not so much outside of it.
But you
Because
spend so
again,
much
I
time in school. Like you're there
yeah,
for, like it's like a job that you don't get paid for. It's crazy.
right. Yeah, so no, and I wasn't in the same class as my sisters for parts of my childhood. Like it depended. I'm trying to think. I know I was in the same class as them. I think from fourth grade on. And
Mm.
then when we went to secondary school, we weren't in the same class again. And then a little bit later, we did take the same subjects. So then we did end up in certain classes together. But yeah, it
Were
was just
you
boring school.
were you naughty with your sisters in class, or were you all very good and studied?
No, we were pretty like my sisters especially were very, very good. I was sometimes a bit loud because I would get really enthusiastic about certain things. And then teachers
Nerdy.
didn't always know how, yeah.
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
teachers didn't always know how to handle that.
I know, but it's funny that, isn't it? Because it's obviously all you really want from a child is enthusiasm and hunger to learn. Because teachers must be pretty used to jaded children kind of just getting through the class. I mean, I was definitely, I don't know, my brain was not suited to a classroom. Like I definitely I have so much enthusiasm to give, but I definitely didn't find it's nice to hear that you found in the classroom you kind of like that environment. It kind of turned you on. And for me it was just I just felt crushed down. But I think sounds like you were quite smart though. Were you good at tests? Were you like good at exams?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. Did you like being good at exams? You're like, yeah, I'm really
No,
good.
I did. Yeah.
See, that's it. I kind of always, I don't think I was very, and obviously there's a whole debate about how important exams are and stuff. But I definitely found that I wasn't very good at exams. And so my measure of worth was not good. Like as in, I wasn't seen as being an achieving student, even though I could have been. I think if I just had if I had a different way to express it. But well, for me, I genuinely didn't like school, and I was a bit naughty. But then I kind of realized that I think basically, looking back, I think that education, apart from maybe someone like you who's really good at it naturally, is a little bit wasted on younger people. I would love to go back to school now.
Oh, I was thinking that just the other week. Like, I would love to go back to university and just study some
Yeah.
more, but it's just so expensive. There's just no way.
Oh, there's not. What did you study? You went to university. What did you study?
I did. I studied English, so I got a master's degree in English literature, with a specialization in early modern literature, and I also did a master's in book and digital media.
Okay, wow, that's really comprehensive, and I can see why that how that set you up for your career. Um,
Yeah, it was helpful.
and you obviously, I mean, I'm assuming you write in English.
I do, yes.
Yeah, because I mean, just a slight digression, like it's really good, and obviously, you know, you're bilingual and all of that, or maybe you're even more than bilingual. But I think that just even being able to like on blood on her tongue to be able to capture the style of a bygone era and not fall into cliched traps. That's the thing which I really liked. It still felt really fresh. It wasn't like you were just kind of going along with the meter of, you know, kind of old and kind of writing. Was there ever a point when you were younger, when you were writing? Because I presume you must have written when you were younger. Like, did you write in English or did you write in Dutch?
As a child, I wrote in Dutch, and then I stopped writing for a while as a teen, and then I decided when I was around 18, 19, like, oh, if I do want to be a writer, I probably have to write. So then I started up in English again, yeah.
So did you had the sense that writing in Dutch was not, you kind of knew, well, if I actually want to be a writer, I can't really. Being a Dutch writer is not, you know, I need a bigger market.
Well, the main thing was because I just started university, so I wanted to improve my essay writing skills. Essay writing is not really a skill we teach Dutch kids
Oh, really?
as much. Yeah, I mean, I think lately we've been teaching them a little more, but it's definitely not a very comprehensive part of Dutch education. So it's definitely something you need to be taught in university, like how do I write a proper essay? So they
Mm,
have specific classes on how to do that. So I started writing in English to improve my English writing skills. And then I was drawn to like different dramas. I really enjoy fantasy. I really enjoy historical fiction. And I knew I wanted to like both for fantasy and gothic, horror adjacent, and just straight up horror. These are not genres that do really well in Dutch.
yeah,
And there's a lot of reasons for why that may be. It's a bit of a chicken and an egg story as well, because people say, oh, you know, Dutch people, they generally know how to read in English. They will just read a fantasy book in English. So we don't have to translate it. Then on the other hand, yeah, well, you're gonna have to read it in English because there is no Dutch translation. So I did know, like, if I want to be a published author, my best bet is to do it in English because there's just not a lot of, there's not a big market for horror or fantasy in the Netherlands, and I think it's changing these past few years.
yeah.
But when I started out, it was definitely not a big thing.
Okay, let's just ask, when did you think, I want to be a writer? And if I want to be a writer, then I need to do this and this in order to make it happen.
I mean, I wanted to be a writer ever since I learned how to read when I was like 7 years old. And then again, like I wrote for a while and then I went to high school and then I kind of stopped doing it because I was
Mm.
busy
Oh
studying and
yeah,
being a nerd.
same with everyone, I think. Yeah, yeah.
And then yeah, I just realized at around 18, 19, because I decided to study German at first and then I switched to English in university. And I really rediscovered my love for reading, and that's
Mm.
kind of when I realized like I really want to be a writer. But then I actually have to write, otherwise, you know, can't be a writer unless you actually practice that skill. So that is not necessarily how I went about it. I would say I also wrote because I just really enjoy
Yeah,
writing.
the
So
process. Yeah.
yeah, so I knew going in like, okay, what I'm gonna write now is probably not something I'm ever gonna be able to publish because I'm still learning. But that's okay because I'm learning as I do it and I am enjoying the process.
I think you can really tell when a writer loves the process, and that's why I would say that I don't really see an existential problem with AI being the thing. Well, oh, I could just press a button, type in a prompt, and it will just spit out all this writing, and I've written a book. And it's like, come on, it must be that love of the process, which creates that melting pot, the alchemy of human experience. I don't separate that from just the love of it doing it. Can you tell me about your like love for writing and how and kind of if you can pinpoint like why it itches your soul and your brain in the way that it does?
I think it's just like it challenges my mind in a way that I find very pleasing. I've always been good with languages. So that helps. But yeah, it's just interesting because like it's quite challenging, I would say, to write a book. I don't understand when writers say it's easy. It's not. I find it very difficult actually sometimes to write a book. Though I do think practice makes perfect, so the more you do it, the easier it gets. But that doesn't mean like I'm currently working on my third book, and right now I'm so ready to just chuck it back to my editor and ask her like, can you please look at it? Because I just can't judge my own work at this point anymore. I do think I've improved upon it
Mm,
with these edits, but I'm sure there's still some stuff we need to work on. But just the idea, like you start with an idea, you have to work out a plot. I never fully know the whole
mm,
plot before I start writing. So as I go, I do make some stuff up as I go along. And that's interesting because you're challenging yourself to come up with new ideas as you're writing it. You know, you're trying to find a satisfying way to tie all the loose ends together to maybe and even just on like a smaller level, how are you going to reveal this particular bit of information in this particular scene? So it's a constant like it's a puzzle. Um
within a puzzle
yeah,
almost. Yeah, yeah,
basically, yes.
yeah. No, it's that's really interesting, and I think the balance, I guess, of having because when it's kind of like improvising, I guess, when you're writing something and you know where you're going, but actually how you get there is the kind of bit where it's almost like acting in your mind. You're kind of going, what's the way that you kind of find, how do I navigate the maze and also make it realistic and logical as well, in as much as so that people can believe that it's actually happening. And like, do you find that that kind of improvisation is more satisfying than, let's say, plotting out a whole book and getting those? I mean, I'm not saying that one has to be more satisfying than the other. Rephrase.
No,
Do you enjoy it?
I think like because that's a lot of beginning writers want writing advice, right? And you get the whole plosser versus pantser
Yeah.
idea. There is no wrong way to write a book. There's just a way that works for you, and there's ways that don't work for you, I personally think. So what works for me, I do enjoy having a rough outline because otherwise I'm writing and I'm just so like nervous about where we're going with this, and I still don't know how we're gonna end stuff, and that is not always the best feeling to have. So I do
Yeah.
enjoy having a bit of a rough outline, but that's mainly okay, we have a beginning, we have an ending, and we have something that happens in the middle, like some big plot
Yeah.
beats, and the rest we'll just figure it out as we go along. And I don't know if that's because I have limited brain space, but I find it really difficult to write an entire like super detailed outline for a book when
Mm.
I haven't started it yet. There is definitely once you actually sit down and you start writing, some unexpected things may happen. And that's actually the joy of writing.
Mm.
So I think for certain people, depending on how your brain works, to work with a really like specific outline of a book could actually hinder you because you might, through the process of writing, suddenly get a new idea for how to do something, and
Yeah.
then you might dismiss that idea because you already put so much work into,
Mm.
outlining this novel. So yeah, like again, whatever works for for other writers, but
Of
for
of
me,
course, of course, and I guess you've got as well. It's quite hard to have a character that you have gone, this is who they are, and you're doing it quite objectively at the beginning. You're kind of like, this is this character, they satisfy these kind of things that is going to work with the story. But then when you actually, I imagine, put the character in the story, they will develop and behave and kind of make, like you said, like like maybe these choices, or like doing things a little different you might not have expected.
yeah, no, they change. Not like usually not massively, but in small ways they do because you develop them more, they become more well-rounded.
And speaking with, and you get used to talking through them, I guess, as well, like
Yeah, that too.
yeah, which is so cool because they are basically, I mean, for you, do you see your characters, especially like central characters, as being kind of a splinter of you, or just different parts of you, or do you base it on other people?
I mean, I guess in a way they all have to be splinters of me because I'm the one imagining them. Sometimes I do misbehave. Like currently I'm writing a scene and these characters just won't shut up. They keep talking. It's like, you guys, please get on the other hand, that's fine, especially for a first draft. It's totally fine. Like I overwrite. That's my problem. I just write too much and then I have to scrap. But that's easier than having to add, and it's fine because I'm also discovering the story as I write it. So sometimes I
Yeah.
have to write stuff, right? And it's just like, okay, this is for me to understand my own story better, and I just have to scrap it later on. But yeah, I do think they're facets of me, and at the same time, I do base them around like not they're never really like one-on-one copies of people, but I do think it's impossible not to be influenced by the people you
Yeah.
interact with. Specifically for my children's book that's coming out like later this year. It's a
Oh
middle
wow.
grade book, right? It's creepy, fantastical. It has triplets as the main characters.
Oh
So
cool.
my sis my sisters read it and they were really like, who's who, you know? And I was like, well, it's not like a one-on-one, but
No,
they
no,
obviously
no.
have traits based on us.
And
So yeah.
how do you feel about like you just the editing of like overwriting, like getting rid of pieces of writing? Like, do you find it difficult to go bye bye to that thing which you might have enjoyed writing and you feel so connected to?
Yeah, I think I mean the best thing you can tell yourself, like rewriting does make your book better. What helps for me is I cannot really effectively scrap when I've just written it. Also because I find it really difficult at that point in time to judge my own work, right? Because I'm too deep into it myself. It's really hard for me to
Yeah.
judge whether the pacing is okay, whether this is like, extra. So, but usually what happens is I hand it into my editor. She's not going to get it back to me straight away. So by the time I get it back, I have a bit of distance. And then
Yeah.
you look at your own work with fresh eyes, and then it's a whole lot easier to just scrap, even if there's certain sentences where you're like, oh, those are so pretty.
Yeah.
Hurts my heart. But, like generally speaking, it does make your book a better book because, it's really, you can have a really
Yeah.
interesting turn of phrase or a really prettily described scene, but if it's ultimately hampering your story, then like it's better to get rid of it.
Let's talk about Blood on Her Tongue, which like I said, I really enjoyed. What is it about?
It's about twin sisters in the late 19th century in the Netherlands, and one of them, Sarah, she's married, and they find a bulk body on her husband's estate, and she's very scientifically minded, so she goes to check it out. Very soon becomes very seriously ill, so they fly in her sister Lucy, her twin, who is not married. She's a companion to an old lady. And they basically ask Lucy to help take care of Sarah, specifically because Sarah has been diagnosed with a brain fever that causes temporary madness, and everybody is very, very eager to keep that a secret from everybody else. Um, yeah, so like Lucy goes there, she finds her sister much worse than she initially expects, and very swiftly starts to wonder whether this diagnosis of a brain fever is correct or whether there is something more sinister and perhaps supernatural going on.
Yeah, well, they'll have to read and find out. But it is such a good premise. And I think particularly for me, because of the period that it's set in, it's actually a lot more recent than you think when you think, because it was 1800s. Is it late 1800s?
Yeah, it's like 1880s,
So
so
it's not that long ago. I mean, that's like 150 years ago ish. Yeah, maths, yes. And so it's kind of like that on the I know the world is always evolving, but the boundary between like modern understanding of things like mental health, science, gender equality, all of these kind of things, it's like that this period is actually really quite good, isn't it? For like exploring. Some people can be more progressive than others. Some people are a bit more stuck in the past. Some people are more kind of, kind of be more provocative in themselves. So, like, why? How did you kind of find this period, and why? You said you liked historical fiction, but like, what was it about this period of time? And also because it's set in Holland as well, in the Netherlands. So, what was it about it?
I think, I mean, it's partially my take on Dracula, and Dracula takes place during that time period, so that's easy to pick. I also already did a lot of research for the 19th century for a different project, and I think I mean, it's a Gothic staple for a reason.
Yeah,
As for the Netherlands, I just enjoy writing about the Netherlands. My third book will actually be set in Germany, so it's not all Netherlands all the time. But I do think it's interesting because, again, horror is not that big in the Netherlands, so you don't really see a lot of Dutch horror. So I figured, I might as well write about this country, where I'm from, where I live, that I know a lot about. And it's also an advantage in that scenario, in that particular case, right? Because nobody writes about Dutch horror, nobody writes Dutch horror. I get to do it, and in that case, I don't want to say be unique because I mean it's not as if absolutely nobody writes Dutch horror, but it is still quite original to do.
does I would say the Netherlands, does it have folklore? Is that a kind of part of culture?
I mean, we do have some folklore. I would say like it's hard to say that there is some specifically Dutch folklore, but what you see a lot of is just this influence of like Germany, France, I mean English folklore as well. So it's not that we have a very specifically Dutch
Yeah.
thing. So there's definitely overlap there. I would say we have, because I am looking into Dutch folklore specifically. We have a lot of fairy-like creatures or ghosts or other monsters
Mm.
who live in ponds and drown people. I think there's like 15 different kinds.
Oh wow, well,
So
yeah.
I guess in that, I mean, makes sense. There's a lot of water in the Netherlands. So, but yeah, like
Yeah, and
that's definitely a thing.
yeah, and but what about because obviously your books are gothic. That's their kind of vibe and atmosphere. And even like you just said that it's set in the same time as Dracula, which I hadn't even thought about. The I guess like why then isn't there a kind of gothic tradition in Holland?
I mean, we do have Gothic architecture. I think part of the reason why it's not very alive today, at least I would say, is because we don't really have a tradition of classics the way English literature does, and that's partially because Dutch has changed as a language more significantly than English has. Because you can totally read, for example, Shakespeare, right? I mean, you might have to get some footnotes here and there, but it's not that difficult to read if you have a
No.
working understanding of English. Um, Dutch from that same time period is a lot harder to understand. So I think that is like if you read a 19th century Dutch book, also because we completely changed our spelling system after the Second World War, that's a whole lot harder to do already. So it's just less accessible, I would say.
So it's like
Um,
the whole language was kind of rejigged after the war.
Yeah, we had some
Oh.
influence, like mainly the spelling. So it's not as if you like read something from the 1930s and it's completely
No, no,
impossible
no.
to read, but it does immediately sort of confront you with the fact like, oh, this is an older text. And I would say too, specifically again for the 19th century, Dutch has never been a very prestigious language. It's never, I mean, there was a point in time where it was a well-spoken language that was important. Hasn't been for a very, very long time. So the elite in the Netherlands didn't, I mean, they did speak Dutch, but not amongst each other. They would
Yeah.
speak French or even like German. So, or, if we go further back, Latin. So people didn't write a lot in Dutch either. So that's also a thing. Like if you, for example, want to study early modern Dutch history, it's actually really beneficial if you speak French and if you have a working understanding of Latin because so many documents were not written in Dutch. So I think
Ah,
that all like influences things. So we have, for example, Belle van Zuilen, who is a famous Dutch fairy tale author, but she wrote in French because why would she write in Dutch? That's
yeah,
not
yeah,
the
yeah.
like that's a language she would speak to her servants, but that's not the language she would speak with her fellow
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
rich aristocratic people.
What do you think are the kind of like the main themes that you were exploring in Blood on Her Tongue? Talk about that.
Like mainly identity, like what makes a person and when do they stop being that person?
Yeah,
And that's especially interesting, I think, to explore within a twin relationship because, I mean, I'm a triplet myself, right? And then my sisters are identical to each other, but not to me. And the way we were treated, like, people got seriously involved in how my parents raised us with a
yeah.
lot of unwanted advice to the point where my mom at one point was literally like, guys, like, are you a triplet or a twin? Do you have triplets or twins? If not, I am not interested in hearing what you have to say
Why
right
would
now.
they? Why were they? Why were people trying to give advice to your mum
I think number one, Dutch people just love to do that in general. Like,
as a superiority thing? Is like going,
it's
oh,
I just unwanted. Like you're just trying to be nice and you give people advice whether they ask for it or not. That is pretty normal to do here. And I think just because people are fascinated by triplets, I mean, we were my parents' first kids. They didn't have kids after us. They were kind of done after the
yeah, well,
the
not
triplets.
a surprise. Not gonna lie.
Right, yeah, they were kind of done with it after that. But yeah, so they were first-time parents, so perhaps a bit insecure about certain things, especially because again, nobody really prepares you for what it's like to raise triplets.
No.
And one of the things that people were pretty obsessed about was us developing our own identity independently of each other, and specifically for my sisters because they're identical. So when we went to primary school, all these people told my parents like you should make sure they don't end up in the same class because otherwise they're never going to get their own friends. They're never going to develop their own identity. And that didn't work for my sister, specifically for my one sister. She really missed me and her other sister, so
Mm.
they put them back together in one class for a bit. So and I think now they've done more scientific research into it, and they actually nowadays advise twin girls not to be separated when they go to school, to just keep them together because it's better for their development. And then when I went to high school, which is when you're around 12 in the Netherlands, we ended up going to the same school because we, all three of us independently thought that school was the nicest out of all the different schools we visited. And again, all these people got involved and they were like, why are you going to the same school? That's really bad for your development. And then even after when we decided, because all three of us went to university and we, again, all three of us chose the same university but different studies. So I did English, my other sister did history, and my other sister did classical languages, so ancient Greek and Latin.
All right, yeah.
But I started out with German. German and ancient languages are not studies you can do anywhere. There are only specific universities that offer it, and that was a very big factor in why we chose the university we did. And then my other sister, she just really enjoyed that university too. So we're 18 at this point, and people are still telling us you shouldn't go to the same university as your sisters because that's bad for your independence and your emotional development. It's like,
Yeah,
number one, I'm 18 at this point. My
yeah,
frontal lobe is pretty well
yeah,
developed, so
yeah,
too little, too late. But yeah, people keep involving themselves because they have this weird fear that if you're a twin or a triplet, it's impossible for you to develop your own identity outside of being a twin and a triplet. And
yeah.
that is something I thought was so interesting to explore within a horror novel, like what makes a person and what happens within like twins and them developing their own identity. And maybe what if that doesn't work out exactly the way it should have, I
Yeah,
think, etc.
no, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what's also quite interesting about that is the fact that you're kind of being othered, haven't you, by people just by them, because obviously you're literally just people. Like it's not being a twin does not make you kind of a special, apart from, it's obviously it's not common and it is pretty cool, but it's not, it doesn't, apart from maybe, yeah, you saying it's good not to separate twins and stuff, it's like you are just people. And so, but you are being othered, it seems like, in a way where it's like special attention, even maybe in terms of you being at school, the other kids, the other parents would have known you as probably a unit of triplets, as opposed
Yeah,
to,
definitely.
yeah. And
And
that,
that's
and
okay, but like
yeah,
that also happened like in high school because I took certain courses together with my sisters, and every now and again you had to do group work, right? I would love to team up with my sisters because we had the same work ethic, and it's like the easiest thing ever because you don't have to go to anybody else's house to get it done. And we would always be told by teachers like choose someone else. Like why are you choosing to work with your sisters again? It's like okay, but there's loads of people here who also always work with their best
friends.
friend,
Yeah.
and nobody tells them to like find someone else. You're only doing that because we're sisters, and that's actually hecka annoying. Yeah.
Yeah, well, but it's interesting, isn't it? Because did you feel defensive? Did you feel like you were pushed together closer, maybe by this slight othering from other people?
Yes, and then like again, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg story because there was definitely a point in time where my sisters and I struggled to make friends. And then people said, oh, it's because you're a triplet, because you guys are already together. So people won't approach you because they think, oh, they already have someone and I'm alone. I can't really join them. But at the same time, we often felt like, okay, but we are always together and we stick together and we do everything together because we don't have any friends.
Yeah.
That sounds very dramatic,
No,
but
no, no.
that
It's
is true. Like we're also being forced together because we don't have friends. And maybe those people found it hard to approach us because we were always together. So again, it's a chicken and an egg story. But I do feel very protective and defensive, like protective towards my sisters. And I do think that one of the reasons I wrote this story is because I was interested to explore the question, how far would I go for
yeah,
my sisters?
yeah.
And I think what's been interesting so far with the reviews, and I won't spoil the ending, but the
Mm.
ending was divisive. There were people who were like, okay, I totally understand that these sisters are super close, raw, raw girl power. And
Yeah.
there were people who were like, this is a super toxic relationship and like they should ditch each other, like Lucy should just get rid of her sister. And that was interesting to me because I feel like knowing that I'm a triplet, there's only one possible way this book could end. And yeah, it's been interesting too because there's one reviewer who didn't like my book, and again, they're totally allowed to do that, right? But I found that what they said very striking because they said like, twins in fiction are already inherently uncanny, and I wanted uncanniness from this novel, and it did not deliver. And I personally disagree with this because I think this novel is inherently uncanny because, Sarah is clearly not Sarah anymore. She's
It's
very off, right? She looks like Sarah, she behaves like Sarah, but is she Sarah? That's the whole thing this novel revolves around. But I found that such an interesting statement because, I mean, they did say in fiction, but even so, I don't think there are twins. Well, maybe some exist, but I think the vast majority of twins and triplets and other multiples would never describe their own relationship as uncanny.
no.
That is something that only a person who is not a twin could ever say about twins, and that was so eye-opening to me. Like, what do you mean they're uncanny? Like, obviously not.
Yeah, and I think it's weird because it's probably all of this mythology around kind of twins, triplets, and like I've mentioned at the beginning, that kind of perception of like, oh, is there telekinesis or they're too close for their own good, as you've described. It is created by being othered and by people looking from the outside and going, they're so close. There must have like this bond, which I probably, like you were saying, not being able to make friends kind of pushes me out and oh they look the same and you can understand how this othering which is not done by triplets or by twins by everyone else kind of creates the myth around it. And that's why I was going to say that I actually think that what this book is good at is actually maybe normalizing or taking a more authentic approach to what could have been quite a generic or like caricature of what twins are like.
Yeah, that was kind of the challenge too, but I think that, I mean, I hope that is what other people will experience when they read this book, that it's a different perspective on twins because you're looking from the inside out rather than the outside in. Because I do have a bit of beef with how twins are generally portrayed within not just horror, but I think in fiction in general. And I've heard this from other twins too, where we're very picky with the twin content we consume because it's very easy to tell whether the makers or the writers are twins themselves because it does often fall into tropes and there's often a misunderstanding of what that twin bond is like. And I also understand if you write twins, you need to get your internal conflict from somewhere. But I think the lazy route is to be like, oh, my one sister was so jealous. So is sisters for some reason too.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, my sister is super evil and jealous and I have to get away from her. It's like, that's not how most twins experience their bond.
No,
And then if you have like fraternal twins, the twincest thing.
of course. Yeah, it's a
Yep.
classic. You've said that you were in a relationship with your sisters. Your relationship kind of made you a bit of an outsider in some ways. And I like to think, I mean, I've always thought of myself as an outsider. And I've noticed that when I speak to people who enjoy horror, that there's quite a lot of people who maybe see themselves on the periphery, or maybe just not part of a mainstream or super easy to get friends and all of that stuff. And do you see a correlation as well between the two things of horror specifically, or all the themes of horror, and maybe just living on the outside and looking from the out inwards?
Yeah, I do think horror generally attracts outsiders. I mean, I think of myself a bit as an outsider too.
Yeah,
So, but yeah, I think because horror basically confirms that, doesn't it? Like there are people who are on the outside, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.
no,
So I think that's kind of where that attraction comes from to sort of see it made explicit. Like, yes, there are outsiders, but sometimes it's okay to be an outsider, or at least like it validates some of those feelings, and that can be quite cathartic, I think.
did that also inform you wanting to write kind of horror fiction, like the fact that you could kind of go, oh, this is actually a really good all the themes that horror actually deals with, I actually feel like I can plug into those quite easily. Like it wasn't performative, it was just like, oh, this suits me quite well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I've always loved horror ever since I was very young. I was a very scared child. My sisters were too. I don't know if that's again the triplet thing where you're never alone, so it's really hard to be alone because
Yeah,
we've just never experienced it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Um, I think maybe because we were born a little prematurely, but we were very small when we were born. So we spent a lot of time in the
Thank God
hospital
for
as
your mother. I'm not
babies.
going to lie. Thank God for your mother.
Right, she did her best, man. But yeah, so I think maybe I don't know, but all three of us were quite scared as children. And
Mm.
my sisters don't really like horror. I mean, I consistently inflict it upon them because they do read my books and then they do enjoy it. But they're like, yeah, we don't like horror, but they do like my books, thank God. But but yeah, I don't know. I think maybe a way of dealing with that fear is to just subject yourself to it. Because at least then you're doing it in a controlled environment, right? If you read a scary story,
Mm.
you're doing it to yourself. So
No, it's weird that though, because I completely agree, and that's me as well. I have anxieties and all of those things, but it also strikes me that there are people who are also very scared, but they don't see horror, and because we're all kind of scared, let's be honest. But like, they don't see horror as a way to kind of medicate the fear. They actually see it as being they're so almost scared of fear itself that like even the idea of wanting to actually read a horror book or watch a horror movie is like, well, why the fuck would I do that? Why are there people, do you think, that other people who read horror and engage with fear as if there's something bad about it? Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it's a negative emotion to a certain. I mean, like negative emotions. I mean, I think there is no such thing as a negative emotion. I think there are emotions that are appropriate and inappropriate for a certain situation, and there's definitely emotions that are fun to experience and emotions that aren't fun. But fear is part of the human experience, and I think um, that's why. I mean, that's I think the best argument to be made in favor of horror. Like being scared or being disgusted or being freaked out, those are all part of the human experience. So why wouldn't you wanna partake in that through at least a safe
Yeah. Well, I don't
way of
know.
fiction, right? Like, I mean, people also
Yeah.
enjoy, I mean, some people don't, but like, there's lots of people who do enjoy watching sad movies and having a good cry and then moving
Yeah.
on, right? So, I mean, like, I think there are some people who are just really scared to tap into any
Yeah.
distressing emotion in general, in which case they won't understand horror. I mean, my experience with people, because I don't have a lot of people in my life who enjoy horror. I mean, my wife does, but my fa direct family members don't really care for it either. Is also that there's generally a misunderstanding of what horror is. Like, generally speaking, people have a very narrow understanding. And then if you explain to them, okay, but horror is far more than that, like horror doesn't even have to necessarily be scary to be good
No.
horror.
No,
And
no.
that's always very surprising to people, right? Like you can watch a horror movie, find it absolutely not scary, and still agree that it's a really, really good horror movie. And I
Yeah.
think in that sense it's unique, right? Because you're not gonna watch a comedy and then not laugh and say, "Oh, this was really good."
No, you're going to say that's rubbish and a waste of money. Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that that's because for me, it's because horror actually it's a filter for basically you can talk about anything. You can find the fear and the anxiety and the dread in anything, I would say. And I probably would say that because I part of my brain does do that. My brain is quite vigilant. I do look for the parts which make me feel uncomfortable. And I do kind of obsess about even uncanniness in life, just because I'm self-aware. And that's just how I think. And so when I read horror or I watch a horror movie, I'm exactly the same. Whereas, I don't get scared particularly easily, but I do love going to the place where it pushes the boundary. I just feel like horror is really about being curious about those parts, about the kind of darker parts. And is that do you kind of agree with that? Do you find like your curiosity is aroused by the kind of weird or the kind of slightly outer things?
Yeah, I do think so. Like I do love fucked up stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Like macabre, but like I think also because I don't know, I'm not necessarily I would say scared of death, but corpses do freak me out and I
They're
find that
uncanny. Yeah.
but yeah, at the same time I think it's a really dumb fear to have because that corpse is not going to do anything, right? They're dead.
No.
Unless they have like Ebola or some other kind of very,
Yeah.
very infectious disease. There's nothing you need to fear about a dead person, and yet I find them very, very scary. And this is not a fear that is necessarily universal, because my wife, for example, volunteered at a morgue, so she has absolutely zero fear of dead
Volunteered
people.
at a morgue.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, right.
Didn't
Yeah,
even get
she's
paid.
American, right? So so yeah, yeah, no, like that's interesting to me because she has other fears that I find hard to understand. But like, she has no problem with dead people whatsoever, and I find corpses very upsetting. But at the same time, I'm aware that it's a silly fear to have, so I do try and push myself by, like engaging with it. And like again, I'm scared, but I'm also fascinated
Yeah.
by corpses. And I think at least for like Blood on Her Tongue, the 19th century is not that long ago. Like my grandmother's grandma was very much alive during
Yeah.
that time period. The way we now sanitize death in modern life in Western Europe, I'd say, and the US, and I think the US is worse. Like they're definitely the worst offender in this case, where they remove death from everyday life in such a
Yeah.
strange way, is actually a very modern development and very yeah, it's a very recent development and definitely not the norm. And I think that is
No.
fascinating to me too, because these characters, they just pull that body out of the bog. They don't have any fear
No.
of that for that, and that makes sense because in the 19th century, people did engage with corpses
Yeah.
quite a lot because people died a lot.
Yeah.
And that is fascinating to me too, to see that I'm so freaked out by something that was so exceptionally common, like so common.
Apart from identity and obviously this death and your fascination with corpses, what's the what were there any other kind of themes within it, for example mental health, like if that's interesting to you to talk about, or maybe there's something more interesting to you to talk for you to talk about?
Oh, no, I do think it's interesting to talk about because it's definitely a big part of the book, mainly the stigmatization of people who are mentally
Yeah.
ill. Um, and I mean, I do have to say, because like I'm using the trope of the asylum as a place of horror for
Yeah.
everybody in this book has an intense fear of it.
But let's be
That's
honest
not.
though as well, it was probably horrendous to be in an asylum, you know.
I think like yeah, I think it depends on when, where, and how. But it's definitely probably not a really, really great place to be. Um, But yeah, I think I wanted to explore that. And this is not to shit on another author, but I read The Mad Women's Ball.
Yes.
And I didn't really like how that portrayed the health asylum because it's based on actual events, right? It's a historical novel. Um, and the reason I didn't like it is because that book, I think, portrays the vast majority of the women who are in that asylum as completely normal, healthy individuals. Perhaps a few of them are traumatized, but they've only been put there because the men in their lives find
Controlling.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the truth is that, yeah, there were women who were put in an asylum because, the men in their lives were not interested in them or they were difficult. But there's also a whole group of women who were in that asylum because they did have serious mental health complaints. And that is not to say that the way they were then treated is a good way to treat it, but I think it would have really helped that book if it had been more nuanced about
Yes.
the portrayal of mental health, specifically to show like there are women here who we would still say might have to be institutionalized because of their mental health issues because they're so debilitating. But even so, they do not deserve the treatment they are getting here. Plus, like, I didn't like the way she portrayed the head of the mental health asylum because he's a real guy who genuinely existed. And I think what I found lacking in that novel is it was like feminism 101, but extremely basic and unnuanced because that particular doctor, and I forget his name right now, is actually a man who worked in that asylum for literally decades, trying his best
Yeah.
to advance the understanding of mental health. And does that mean that he is completely ethical in our modern day view? No, of course not. Like he did a
No.
bunch of stuff that is wildly unethical. But at the same time, he's a guy who, for example, argued that the working class is no different from the middle class and the upper class in like how their brains work, etc., which was radical at the time. He spent decades with the same patients, often proving that a bunch of them were not crazy, but
Mm.
had real neurological illnesses that caused their symptoms. So he could prove for a certain number of them, like these are people who don't have a mental illness, but they have a physical illness that is causing mental health problems,
Yeah.
which was important because, stigmatization of the mentally ill. It's even now, I would say easier to if you have a physical condition that causes mental issues. I think people are more compassionate towards you. Um, And he is a guy who is one of the first professor who ever allowed female students into his
Yeah.
classroom, and he took on female students to help him and to like the he educated women in a time when that was not the norm. And so for this book to portray him so one-sidedly, I found that pretty upsetting actually, because it's like you have such a very
Mm.
interesting
Yeah.
bit of actual history, and you could say something extremely interesting while still being feminist, and you're fumbling it so hard.
No, I get it. And I actually think that, well, I think it even goes back to what we were talking about. We were talking about the way that, triplets or twins are kind of portrayed. It's like there are these cookie cutter kind of things, or things that everyone, I think we can all immediately connect to. Oh, women in an asylum, they're bound to be mistreated. They're probably there because a man has put them there and they were too kind of like wild in themselves. And so they need to be electrocuted. That's like quite as like you said, of course there will have been examples of that happening, but it is a letdown. And I think this is where horror really comes into its own, by being able and being brave enough to go, okay, that was happening, but then there was this happening as well. And like that nuance between them, I think, is for me the thing that makes good horror writing. And it's not just horror obviously, but I feel for me that's where horror excels at going, yeah, okay, this guy was unethical, did fucked up shit, but at the same time that was just his product of his the horror of his time. It's like there are so many things that we would do differently now, obviously, but it doesn't mean that you vilify the past, because it's part of the story and how we got here.
Right, and the
you know
reason we would do things differently is because he did them a certain way, and we now know, okay, that's not the way to do it.
yeah.
But yeah, like that's something that some people didn't like about Blood on Her Tongue, because they argue, okay, the men are completely justified in wanting to institutionalize
Hmm.
Sarah. And it's like, that's true from their perspective. I
Yeah.
understand that that makes sense, and I am not disputing that, but that's also part of the horror, right? That
Yeah.
they think they're completely right to do what they're doing, because they're not institutionalizing her because they think she's inconvenient or she's too smart or whatever,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
very clearly is having some sort of
Yeah.
mental health crisis that they don't know how to deal with. The horror is not necessarily them deciding we want to put this woman in an asylum. It's them not listening to Lucy when she tries to explain things, to sort of completely disregard how these women feel about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are people who, for example, give me a bad review, but they're honest in that they admit like I don't read
This
this
isn't my
genre
thing. Yeah.
often and I didn't enjoy it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine because it wasn't for you, but I'm glad you tried to read something out of your comfort zone, because I think it's good to try every now and again. If there's a particular genre you don't like, I think it's still good to try every now and again to see, do I still not like it?
Yeah.
Experiment, successful. And also then I'm fine with like, I'm always fine with receiving a bad review, I think. But especially in that scenario, because it's like, okay, well, this wasn't for you. You were never going to enjoy it. That's fine. I mean, I'm not always fine with a bad review. I mean, sometimes people said like my books are homophobic, and that does make me angry.
Why did they say that it was homophobic? Well, this
I
is my
think,
darling dreadful thing. Did they say that was homophobic?
yeah, for Blood on Her Tongue, because they say the conflation of
Ah,
queerness and madness. And it's like, okay, but again, that is something that the characters in this book might
yeah.
subscribe to, but that is not what the book itself supports, and that's definitely not what I support either.
No,
So,
of course not. I more or less assume that people who leave reviews like that, it's more about themselves than it is about the thing that you've done. Like I said before, like I think people bring their own interpretations, and that probably people are kind of hairpin triggered to kind of go,
right, and
the
that's sad in its own way.
no, it's and
If
it's
you
that
always, right,
that's
if you
not
always see the bad.
that's nothing to do with you. That would be to do with stuff that's happened to them or their perspective, which is, that's nothing. You can't control any of that. I certainly wasn't getting that at all. And especially because as well, on top of, like I said, your otherness as well, you're a queer person, you're married to a woman.
For me, discovering that I was queer was actually a really like a relief and almost a
Yeah,
euphoric thing. And the only thing I was scared of was more how other people respond to it.
of
Not like
course.
I
Yeah.
kind of felt like I discovered something very important about myself, and I was glad to discover that. It was more so like being queer is terrifying, not because it's inherently terrifying to be queer,
No.
but because of the world we live in,
Yeah.
right? So I do really enjoy writing about queer characters. Not only in horror, I definitely want to explore other genres as well, but just because I'm queer, so it is a part of my life. It's not the only part of my life, obviously, but
No.
I do enjoy writing about it. I mean, like I think at one point I sort of tracked how many queer books I read in a year, and it was less than 20%, which was interesting to me because I thought it would be more because
Yeah.
I am a person who does seek out queer books. And of
Yeah.
course, like there was some nonfiction there, some children's books that are generally not,
No.
they're not queer openly often.
No.
So, but even so, that was a very low percentage to me.
Yeah.
And sort of that kind of drove home the point to me, like I exist in a very straight world, and I know a lot of straight people, and I am consistently interacting with straight media and straight people, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I understand that that's the norm. I have nothing against straight people, but every now and again, I do want to consume queer stuff because that at least validates my experiences. So if I'm writing, I'm honest. I genuinely do think I can write a straight novel and have a really good time with it because
Yeah.
again, I am not like I exist
Yeah.
outside of my queerness, but I overall do find it more rewarding to write queer characters. I just think it's fun.
Yeah, totally. And I think that there's my favorite queer books are often quite playful and they have the playfulness and the darkness. Like as you said, that kind of thing of being queer in itself is not a scary thing. Obviously, it's nothing. It's just a thing. It's a state of being. But it's the way that then that interacts with the outside world, and like I was saying again at the beginning about the otherness, being othered as twins or whatever it is. There's so many ways the world puts you over there. When you read horror, do you kind of often see yourself in the books that you read? Like, do you find yourself easily relating to subject matter?
I think so. Like, I have this weird thing, and I sometimes ask people this, and I don't know if I'm unique with this, but when I dream, I'm not often myself. Like, I am still
Oh,
me, but I can look very different. Like, I can be a guy, I can be a woman, I can be like any sort of thing. Like, yeah, and like
that's
people are
epic.
always like, "Oh, that's weird." Like, I've never really met anyone who has the same thing, so I find that interesting. So in that sense, I do find it easy to relate to other characters and things. Like, I do have to say, I don't think. I mean, you don't have to be able to relate to a book to enjoy it.
No,
But I find it like I think it's probably more like it has to do with empathy that you at least can empathize with a character or situation. So yeah, I do. I don't find that too difficult. No.
okay. I'm gonna wrap it up by asking you just what you reading at the moment, if you can.
So I am reading several arcs, and I am currently the main book I'm reading is this one. It's The Lamp by Lucy Rose.
I've read it. I enjoyed it. And what are you watching? Do you watch
So
TV?
I'm not watching that much. I mean, my wife is still in the US right now. So we watch a lot of stuff on the weekends, and then I don't really want to watch a series because it takes forever to finish.
Yeah.
So we mainly watch movies, but as soon as she's here, we want to start the Wheel of Time.
Wheel
Yeah.
of Time. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah. No, I've not seen that. And what music do you listen to?
Like it depends. For writing, I enjoy instrumental music, so a lot of soundtracks. I
Like
do
film
enjoy some,
soundtracks? Oh,
yes.
nice, cool.
Yeah, and then I mean I listen to Hoser, I listen to Aurora, Florence and the Machine, all
Okay, so I see
standard
you.
queer stuff.
Yeah, 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 totally.
Um, yeah, and I enjoy rock and heavy metal too. So
Yes. Do you, so I love my heavy metal. Do you have any like favorites? Is there
I
any?
mean I listen to Powerwolf a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, fine. I respect that. Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for taking quite a lot of time to talk to me. Genuinely very lovely for me to speak to you because I remember I read your first book like last year and I just remember being like, oh my God, this is so good. And I always kind of I fantasize a little bit like, oh my God, she must be so cool. Like also you are a she, aren't you? I'm sorry, I'm not
Yes.
misgendering you.
No,
Uh,
no, no, I do identify as a she, yeah.
Okay, good. So I was, but so like it's very nice for me to be able to like having read a book and then being like, oh my God, I bet they're so cool. And then actually get to speak to you. And of course you are very cool and very,
I'm
and
a nerd.
no, yeah, but I mean, so am I. But just, yeah, thank you so much. Like, I really, really appreciate you talking to me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
See you. Bye bye.